Welcome to Velvet Echoes. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment and let us know what city you're tuning in from. We love seeing where our listeners are. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe. We put out new stories every week, and trust us, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now settle in, because this one is going to stay with you. The morning Kenneth Ashworth handed his wife divorce papers, he was smiling. Not the nervous kind of smile, not the apologetic kind. The wide, satisfied kind, the kind a man wears when he believes he has finally won something. He set the envelope on the kitchen counter while Miriam was standing at the stove, still in her robe, pouring coffee. He didn't say anything at first, he just placed it there deliberately, the way you place a chess piece at the end of a long game. She looked at it, then she looked at him. "What's this?" she asked. "You know what it is," he said. She did. Miriam Ashworth. Miriam Lacey, before she married him, 14 years ago in a small ceremony in Niagara-on-the-Lake, with 30 guests, and her mother crying in the front row, had known for months that something like this was coming. She just hadn't known it would come on a Tuesday. She hadn't known it would come while the coffee was still brewing, and the morning news was murmuring in the next room, and the maple tree in the backyard still had all its leaves. She picked up the envelope. She turned it over once in her hands. "I'll have my lawyer look at it," she said. Kenneth laughed, short and dismissive, a single exhale through his nose. "Of course you will." He grabbed his keys off the hook by the door. He was already in his coat. He had planned this, she realized. He had dressed before coming downstairs. He had timed it so he could hand her the envelope and leave before she had a chance to respond, before she had a chance to make it complicated. The door closed behind him. Miriam stood in the kitchen for a long time. The coffee finished brewing. The news anchor on the television said something about the weather in Ottawa. The maple tree stood very still in the yard, its leaves orange and red and perfectly indifferent. She set down her mug. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed that had been theirs, in the room that had been theirs, and she looked at the wall for exactly 4 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person she needed to call. Not her lawyer, not her sister, not her mother. She called Douglas Ferris, her research partner, and the only person who knew what she had been working on for the past 2.5 years. The only person who understood what was about to happen. "It's done," she said when he answered. "He served me this morning." A pause. "Then, are you okay?" "I will be," she said. "But we need to move up the timeline, to understand what Miriam had been building. You have to go back. Not to the marriage, though that matters too, but to the laboratory, to the university, to the version of Miriam Lacey who existed before Kenneth Ashworth decided she was worth something. She had grown up in Hamilton, Ontario, the daughter of a nurse and a high school science teacher. She was not the kind of girl anyone called exceptional. She was quiet, careful, methodical. She did well in school the way some people do, not through brilliance, but through patience. Through the willingness to stay at the problem longer than anyone else in the room. She got her PhD in biochemistry from the University of Toronto at 29. She was not the fastest in her program. She was not the most naturally gifted. But she was the one who stayed in the lab after everyone else had gone home. She was the one who kept running the same experiment with different variables when every other researcher had moved on to easier questions. She met Kenneth at a fundraising dinner for the university's science faculty. He was in commercial real estate, handsome, charming, good at talking to rooms full of people. He found her at the edge of the crowd and seemed genuinely fascinated by what she was doing. He asked questions. He remembered the answers. He called her 2 days later and asked if she wanted to have dinner, just the two of them, somewhere quiet. She said yes. What happened over the next 3 years was a love story of the ordinary kind, dinners and weekends and slow mornings, and the gradual, unremarkable process of two lives becoming one. He was generous, he was attentive. He told her, many times, that he was proud of her work. The first sign that something was off came so slowly that she almost missed it. It started when she was offered a senior research position at a biotech firm in Mississauga, a good offer, a serious one. Kenneth had opinions about it. He thought the commute was too long. He thought she'd be giving up her academic independence. He thought she should stay where she was comfortable, where she was, though he never used this word. Manageable. She turned down the offer. She told herself it was her own decision. It was easier to believe that. Over the following years, the same pattern repeated to Aunt Elsa in different forms. A conference in Vancouver she didn't attend because he didn't want her gone for a full week. A collaboration with a research team in Montreal that never materialized because Kenneth had found reasons. Reasonable-sounding reasons always, why it wasn't the right time. A grant application that she had worked on for months, that she had submitted without telling to them first, and that he had found out about and been coldly, quietly furious about for days afterward, though he never explained exactly why. The grant was approved. He never congratulated her. By the time Miriam understood the shape of what her marriage actually was, she was 39 years old and 2 years into the most important work of her life. It had started, as most important things do, by accident. She was studying protein folding mechanisms, dry, technical work that most people couldn't sit through a description of, when she noticed something in the data that wasn't supposed to be there, an anomaly. A response pattern that the existing literature said was impossible. She ran it again. Same result. She ran it 11 more times over the following 3 months. Same result every time. She brought it to Douglas Ferris, who was 8 years her junior and twice as skeptical, and she showed him the numbers. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. "This can't be right," he said. "I know," she said. "Run it again," he said. She ran it again. He was quiet for a very long time after that. What Miriam had found, though she didn't know the full implications yet, was a mechanism that could be used to dramatically accelerate the body's response to a specific class of inflammatory compounds. The applications were broad and they were significant. In certain disease contexts, the difference between this mechanism working or not working was the difference between a treatment that took years and one that took weeks. She told Kenneth none of this, not because she didn't want to, but because she had learned, slowly and without fully naming the lesson, that telling Kenneth things gave him the opportunity to have opinions about them, and his opinions, over the years, had a way of becoming obstacles. So she worked at night. After dinner, after he'd gone to watch television, or call his friends, or do whatever he did, in the hours she'd stopped paying attention to. She sat at the small desk she'd set up in the spare bedroom, and she ran calculations, and she drafted papers, and she answered emails from Douglas at 11:30, at night, at 12, at 1 in the morning, because the work was moving fast now and it needed her full attention, and she was not willing to slow it down. She was, for the first time in years, genuinely happy. Kenneth noticed the happiness the way certain people notice things they can't control, with suspicion. He started asking more questions. Where was she going? Who was Douglas, exactly? Why couldn't she talk about what she was working on? She explained, patiently, that the work was at a sensitive stage, that she couldn't discuss proprietary research, that this was standard in her field. He didn't believe her. She found out later that he'd gone through her laptop, that he'd read her emails, that he'd seen enough to understand that something significant was happening, something he hadn't been consulted about, something that had been deliberately kept from him, and that this, more than anything, was what had made him decide the marriage was over. Not that she had been dishonest, that she had been independent. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days before Miriam called her lawyer. His name was Arthur Bream, 61 years old, unhurried, the kind of man who made people feel, without quite knowing why, that things would be handled correctly. She had worked with him once before, years ago, on a question about intellectual property rights for a paper she'd co-authored. She explained the situation. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "And the research, where does it stand legally?" "Everything I developed was done independently," she said. "My own time, my own equipment, no overlap with any joint assets." "Are you certain?" "I am," she said. "I was very careful." She had been careful. Deliberately, methodically, almost obsessively careful. Dates, times, equipment logs, purchase receipts, paid from her own account. She had not used a single piece of jointly owned property. She had not done a single hour of this work on their shared time. She had consulted Arthur's predecessor 2 years earlier, before any of this began, and had done exactly what she was told. Arthur was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "Good." The divorce proceedings moved through the courts with the slow, bureaucratic grace of the Canadian legal system. Kenneth wanted the house. He wanted a portion of her future income from any research she was currently developing. He had a lawyer who made arguments that sounded on paper not entirely unreasonable. Miriam sat through the early meetings calmly. She took notes. She asked questions in the measured, precise way she asked questions in her lab, not to provoke, but to clarify. Kenneth watched her from across the table and seemed to find this infuriating, though he kept his own face carefully composed. He had expected her to be distressed. She wasn't. Not because she wasn't in pain. She was, in ways she didn't examine too closely, in the small hours when the house was quiet, and the memory of who they had once been to each other felt like a bruise she kept pressing. But distress wasn't useful. Distress was something to process on her own time, in her own way, after the work was done. She had a presentation in 6 weeks. That was what mattered now. The presentation had been arranged through a contact of Douglas's, a man named Philip Garner, who ran a private health sciences investment group based in Toronto. He had seen a brief summary of their preliminary findings, arranged through the appropriate channels, and had expressed what his assistant described as strong interest. He wanted them to come in and present to his full board. Douglas had called her immediately. "Philip Garner," he said, like the name was supposed to mean something. "I know who he is," Miriam said. Everyone in her field knew who Philip Garner was. He was 64 years old, quiet-spoken, financially disciplined, in a way that made other investors look reckless. He had backed 3 biotech companies in the past decade, 2 of which had been acquired within 5 years, for amounts that had made national news. He did not take meetings with researchers who didn't have something real. "How much time do we have?" she asked. 6 weeks, Douglas said. "Then we have a lot of work to do," she said. The 6 weeks that followed were the most demanding of Miriam's professional life. She was preparing a presentation for one of the most consequential meetings she would ever have. She was simultaneously managing divorce proceedings with a husband who had now decided, once he learned, through his own lawyer, that the research was likely protected, that he wanted to drag the process out as long as possible. She was doing both of these things while continuing to hold her position at the university, showing up to teach, showing up to departmental meetings, performing the normal rhythms of a normal professional life. She slept between 5 and 6 hours a night. She ran every morning at 5:30 in the dark along the waterfront trail near her house, because she had learned years ago that her thinking was clearest when her body was in motion. She did not call Kenneth. She did not respond to his texts, which came occasionally and ranged from businesslike to something harder to name. She forwarded everything to Arthur and went back to work. Douglas watched all of this and said, once carefully, "You don't have to be okay, you know." "I know," she said. "But you're going to be," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said, "I am." The Garner Group occupied the top 3 floors of a building on Bay Street in downtown Toronto. Miriam arrived 20 minutes early, which was not early enough. Douglas was already there, pacing the lobby in the way he paced when he was nervous, which he would deny if you asked him. "You look calm," he said when he saw her. "I am calm," she said. "That's either very good or very concerning," she smiled at him. It was a real smile. Small, dry, warm. The kind she didn't give to many people. Philip Garner came down to see them himself, which she hadn't expected. He was shorter than she'd imagined, with the kind of unhurried handshake that belongs to people who stopped needing to prove things a long time ago. He said he was glad they'd come. He said he'd read their materials twice. He led them upstairs. The boardroom had floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. There were 11 people around the table. Investment analyst, legal counsel, a scientific advisor Miriam recognized from a paper she'd cited 4 years ago. They all looked at her with the particular attention of people who are trying to decide if something is worth a very large amount of money. She was not nervous. She had spent her entire career preparing for rooms exactly like this one. Rooms where the question was whether her work was real, whether her data held up, whether she could defend every number and every claim under pressure. She had been doing that since she was 22 years old. She was very good at it. She began. She spoke for 40 minutes, without notes. She had practiced until she didn't need them, walking through the mechanism, the data, the potential applications, the timeline, the intellectual property protections already in place. She answered questions directly and without hedging, acknowledged what was still uncertain, explained why the uncertainties were manageable. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Philip Garner, who had said almost nothing during the presentation, looked at her steadily. "Dr. Ashworth," he said, "what would you need to get this to clinical trial stage within 30 months?" she told him. He nodded. He looked at the people around the table. Several of them nodded in return. "Then let's talk about what that looks like," he said. The agreement took another 4 weeks to finalize. Arthur managed the legal side. Miriam reviewed every clause. When the documents were signed, the value of the investment, structured as a combination of upfront funding and equity stakes that would be formed around the research, came to $240 million over a projected 5-year development period. She sat in Arthur's office afterward while his assistant brought coffee. Arthur, who had seen a great many things in his career and was not easily impressed, looked at the documents on the table in front of him and was quiet for a moment. "You should be very proud," he said. "I did the work," she said. "That's all. That's everything," he said. Kenneth found out the way people find out things they weren't supposed to know through someone who thought he already knew. It was a colleague of his, a man he knew from a real estate deal a few years back who had a brother-in-law in finance. The brother-in-law had been at an industry dinner where the Garner Group's new partnership had come up in conversation. The name Ashworth had been mentioned. Kenneth called his lawyer the next morning. He wanted, his lawyer explained to Arthur, to revisit the terms of the settlement. He believed that certain marital assets had not been fully disclosed. He believed that the research, which had been conducted during the period of the marriage, on time that could be considered shared time. Arthur listened to all of this without interruption. Then he said, politely and with complete accuracy, that this argument had no legal foundation. He described, briefly and precisely, the documentation that Miriam had assembled over the previous 2.5 years, the dated records, the equipment logs, the receipts, the consultation Arthur's own office had provided before the research began. He said that Kenneth was welcome to pursue the matter if he chose to. He noted that pursuing the matter would be expensive and would not succeed. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Kenneth's lawyer said he would call back. He called back 2 days later and confirmed that his client would not be pursuing the matter further. The settlement was finalized on a Thursday afternoon in early November. Miriam signed the last document in Arthur's office and shook his hand and walked out into the afternoon. The sky over Bay Street was gray and heavy, with the particular kind of November light that never quite decides whether it's going to snow. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. She thought about the kitchen counter where Kenneth had placed the envelope on a Tuesday morning in September. She thought about the maple tree in the backyard with all its leaves. She thought about what it had felt like to sit on the edge of the bed and look at the wall for 4 minutes. She took out her phone and called Douglas. "It's done," she said. "Both things?" he asked. "Both things," she said. A pause. Then he said, "So what do we do now?" She looked up at the gray sky. Somewhere above the clouds, she knew, the sun was still there, indifferent and unaffected by any of it. "We go back to work," she said, and she did. There's a particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't break furniture or raise its voice or demand to be acknowledged. It shows up at 5:30 in the morning, when it's still dark outside. It stays at the desk when the house is quiet. It keeps the records and reads the clauses and answers the emails at 1 in the morning, because the work needs it, and the work is real and the work is hers. It doesn't wait to be seen. It just keeps going. If this story stayed with you today, leave a comment below and tell us, what city are you watching from? And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. There's a new story coming next week, and you're going to want to be here for it.